I'm Aura, 32 years old, sitting in divorce court, watching my husband of 7 years laugh as he signs our divorce papers. Ethan always thought I was just his tech nerd wife with no real-world ambition, happy to tinker with code in my spare time. Little did he know that while he was cheating on me with his coworker, I was building a tech empire right under his nose. The judge is about to read my financial statement, and I can't wait to see his smug smile disappear. Before I tell you how my soon-to-be ex-husband's smile vanished from his face, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one expected you to. I was a quiet, unassuming girl from a small town in rural Washington, surrounded by endless forests and a sky full of stars. My parents, both high school teachers, instilled in me a deep love for learning and a practical, no-nonsense approach to life. But while my peers were dreaming of becoming veterinarians or forest rangers, I was captivated by the glowing screens of computers. I spent hours dissecting old electronics, teaching myself to code from library books, and imagining worlds built of algorithms and logic. When I got into the computer science program at the University of Washington in Seattle, it felt like I was finally coming home. Seattle, with its rain, coffee, and thriving tech scene, was everything I had dreamed of. I thrived in my classes, fascinated by the elegant solutions code could offer. My true passion, however, lay in mobile application development. I spent countless nights in the university's computer labs, not just on assignments, but on personal projects, small, quirky apps that solved minor inconveniences or simply brought a smile to my face. I dreamed of creating something truly impactful, an app that could genuinely improve people's lives. I met Ethan Maxwell during my senior year at a university tech mixer. He was a brilliant architectural engineering student, tall and with an easy charm that drew people in. He came from old Boston money, a family with a long lineage of prestigious architects and engineers, and carried himself with an air of understated superiority. His first words to me were, "You actually understand hexadecimal?" Most girls I meet think it's a fancy word for a six-sided shape. I remember bristling at the most girls' part, but his intense gaze and genuine curiosity about my coding projects quickly disarmed me. He seemed genuinely impressed by my technical mind. A refreshing change from the typical small talk I often encountered. Our romance was a whirlwind of late-night study sessions that turned into philosophical debates and weekend trips exploring the vibrant neighborhoods of Seattle. Ethan introduced me to a world of sophisticated art galleries, classical concerts, and exclusive rooftop bars, a stark contrast to my quiet life in front of a computer screen. He was attentive, driven, and seemingly proud of my intelligence, even if he didn't quite grasp the intricacies of my code. I saw a future where our analytical minds could build something beautiful, both literally and figuratively. I was making a modest income as a junior software developer at a promising tech startup, working on back-end systems for their data analytics platform. I loved my job, the intellectual challenges, and the collaborative energy of a startup environment. It felt like I was contributing to something tangible, something that mattered. Ethan, however, often referred to it as my little coding gig. Why exhaust yourself crunching numbers for someone else when you could be part of something grander, Aurora? He'd say, gesturing to his architectural blueprints. He didn't understand that my career was about more than just a paycheck. It was about the thrill of creation, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, and my identity as an innovator. The proposal came a year after we met, on a meticulously planned trip to Boston to meet his family. He proposed on a historic bridge, overlooking the Charles River, a diamond ring that seemed to sparkle with the weight of generations. It felt like a storybook moment, perfectly curated for maximum impact. His Aunt Caroline, a formidable woman who ran the family's philanthropic foundation, gave me a tight smile when I showed her the ring. "A lovely gem for a clever girl," she commented, her eyes assessing my simple dress. That was my first real taste of how his family viewed me, as someone who was bright, yes, but ultimately from a different, less distinguished world. Our wedding was intimate and elegant, my choice despite his family's push for a lavish affair at a historic Boston estate. I wanted something that felt authentic to us, not a grand display of their wealth. Looking back, that was one of the few times I truly stood my ground against the Maxwell family's unspoken expectations. After a honeymoon in Maui, we settled into Ethan's sprawling condo in a prime Seattle neighborhood. Everything was sleek, modern, and curated, much like his family. I tried to add personal touches, my ergonomic keyboard, a collection of vintage circuit boards I'd repurposed into art, my worn coding books. But Ethan preferred the minimalist aesthetic that showcased his design principles rather than our combined personalities. The first subtle cracks appeared within months. Ethan would question every tech gadget I bought, criticized my choice of friends, and made subtle digs about my career path. "App development is so fleeting," he once said, after I excitedly told him about a new open-source project I was contributing to. "You have the potential to design something tangible, something that will last, but you're squandering it on transient code for devices that will be obsolete in 2 years." I tried to fit into his social circle, the wives of other architects and civil engineers who spent their days planning elaborate dinner parties or discussing property investments. They were polite enough to my face, but never truly accepted me. I overheard one of them at a gallery opening, referring to me as Ethan's little tech project. Instead of defending me, Ethan later suggested I try harder to connect. "Maybe tone down the tech talk, Aurora," he'd advised. "They just need to see that you're making an effort to adapt to our lifestyle." As if my identity was something to be molded and corrected. Those early years were a confusing mix of luxury and loneliness, of being showered with expensive gifts while feeling my self-worth diminish. I was slowly becoming what Ethan wanted, a brilliant but quiet partner who reflected well on his refined image. While the independent, innovative coder I had been was fading away. 3 years into our marriage. The tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. Ethan had always been particular about our finances, but his behavior became increasingly controlling. Despite our joint accounts, he questioned every tech purchase I made, while spending lavishly on himself. Without discussion, "Did you really need that new graphics card?" he would ask, scrutinizing the credit card statement. "That's $800 that could have been invested in a more stable asset, like real estate." Meanwhile, he thought nothing of dropping thousands on vintage design books or exclusive architectural software licenses. Gradually, I found myself isolated from my tech friends and family. Visits to my parents in rural Washington became less frequent because Ethan always had an excuse: a client meeting, a dinner with influential developers he claimed were too highbrow for my family, or simply that the quiet of the countryside was too provincial for his tastes. My college friends stopped calling after Ethan made it clear they weren't intellectually stimulating enough for his home. "Your friend, Marcus, actually asked if our smart home system was open source," he scoffed after a game night I had organized. "As if we would use anything but proprietary systems." It's embarrassing, Aurora. My career, which had once been a source of pride, became a constant battleground. When I was offered a lead developer position at my startup, Ethan wasn't supportive. "Is the modest bump in salary worth the extra hours away from home?" he questioned. "We're trying to build our family's legacy soon, remember?" This was news to me. Whenever I brought up having children, he always said the timing wasn't right, that our finances weren't stable enough for the demands of raising a Maxwell. It was around this time that I discovered my passion for building intuitive, mobile applications. The startup I worked for pivoted towards a new consumer-facing product, and I volunteered to lead the UX/UI development. I found I had a knack for understanding user behavior and designing elegant, seamless interfaces that delivered exceptional experiences. Excited about this new direction, I shared my idea of eventually starting my own boutique app development firm with Ethan. His response was crushing. "Aurora, be realistic. Starting a business requires a certain social capital, which isn't exactly your strong suit. Besides, most tech startups fail within the first year." Our approaches to money highlighted our fundamental differences. Ethan believed in conspicuous consumption, the right address, the right car, the right vacation spots, all to maintain an image of success. I, with my modest upbringing, believed in saving, investing wisely, and finding value rather than just high price tags. As our 4th anniversary approached, Ethan's late nights at work became the norm rather than the exception. Big architectural bids, client presentations, quarterly reports. His excuses varied, but his absence remained constant. I ate dinner alone most nights, went to bed alone, and increasingly lived the life of someone single. But with the financial scrutiny of a child receiving an allowance, our first truly major argument came after his family's annual summer gathering in Boston. In the car ride home, his Aunt Caroline had pointedly asked when we would be giving her little architects to carry on the family name. I mentioned that I was ready whenever Ethan was, only to have him smoothly change the subject. When I confronted him at home, His reaction was cold. "Children are a massive responsibility and expense," he said, loosening his tie. "With your hobbies, and my family's expectations, any child of ours would need trust funds, private schooling, the right connections. We're not there yet financially." "Not there yet?" I questioned, genuinely confused. "Ethan, you make 7 figures. Your family has generational wealth. What are we waiting for?" His response was telling. "My money isn't the issue. You still haven't established yourself properly? What would you contribute to a child's future beyond code?" The hurt of his words festered as days turned into weeks. His dismissive attitude toward my career, the implication that my passion was insignificant, solidified something in me. I needed financial independence, not just for myself, but for my sanity. That week, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. I set up a small direct deposit from my paycheck, not enough that Ethan would notice if he checked our joint accounts, but enough to start building something of my own. Simultaneously, I began educating myself on financial independence. Read books on venture capital, took free online courses on intellectual property law for startups, and subscribed to newsletters about emerging tech markets. All of this I did in private browse modes, careful not to leave digital breadcrumbs for Ethan to discover. The woman who had once been swept off her feet by grand gestures and expensive dinners, was slowly awakening to the gilded cage she lived in and planning her escape, one small step at a time. While Ethan continued his late nights at work, I began laying the foundation for my independence. Using my growing separate savings, I registered a small business entity, Aurora Vance Innovations, and built a simple but professional website showcasing my portfolio of personal app projects and my services. My first challenge was finding time to work on my business without Ethan knowing. I converted our rarely used media room into a home office, explaining to Ethan that I needed a dedicated space for freelance coding projects to supplement our income. He barely paid attention to the change, dismissing my freelance work as a hobby rather than a serious endeavor. "Just don't let it interfere with our social obligations," was his only concern. My first client came through a stroke of luck at a local tech meet. I overheard Marcus Thorne, an old college friend who was now running a struggling but beloved indie game studio, complaining about the exorbitant quotes he'd received from app development agencies. "I can't afford $10,000 for a mobile version of our game, but we're losing ground to bigger studios," he told another developer. I introduced myself, explained my background, and offered to help him at a fraction of the cost, with the understanding that I was building my portfolio. Marcus, remembering my coding prowess from university, took a chance on me. The results exceeded both our expectations. His game's mobile version garnered over 100,000 downloads in its first month, and the positive reviews led to a surge in his studio's overall revenue. The success was dramatic enough that he referred me to other indie developers and small tech startups in his network. Working with Marcus not only gave me my first success story, but also a genuine friendship, something I had been missing in Ethan's curated social circle. He was authentic, hardworking, and appreciated my skills in a way my husband never had. "You have a gift, Aurora," he told me over coffee one day, using my old college nickname. "You understand what makes an app intuitive and how to make users fall in love with it." I worked late nights while Ethan was away on his increasingly frequent business trips. I converted our walk-in pantry into a makeshift soundproof booth for client calls, using old blankets to dampen the sound. Every new client was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because my business was growing. Terrifying because discovery would mean confrontation. The learning curve was steep. I made mistakes undercharging for complex projects, occasionally overpromising on timelines, but I learned quickly. Each client taught me something new about running a business, about setting boundaries, about valuing my own work. I used my savings to invest in essential equipment and software, carefully hiding the charges among household expenses or making cash purchases. My client list grew steadily over the course of a year, primarily through referrals and word of mouth. Rather than spending the profits, I reinvested most of them back into the business and began setting aside a portion for future investments. Ethan remained oblivious, attributing my increasing confidence to finally adjusting to our lifestyle rather than professional fulfillment. A pivotal moment came when I worked with a local e-commerce startup whose user engagement increased so dramatically after I redesigned their mobile app that their story was featured in a prominent tech blog. I had to decline being mentioned by name, citing privacy reasons, but the success gave me credibility with larger clients. Through Marcus, I met Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned data scientist and influential tech consultant who had sold her first AI startup for 9 figures and was launching a new venture in ethical AI, initially hiring me for a small UI/UX project. Dr. Sharma quickly became both a valued client and mentor. "You're charging too little for your expertise, Aurora," she told me bluntly after reviewing my rate sheet. "Triple your prices and watch how your perceived value changes." She was right. When I raised my rates, instead of losing clients, I attracted more established tech companies willing to pay for quality. Dr. Sharma also introduced me to the world of strategic tech investments beyond simple savings accounts. "Cash loses value sitting still," she explained. "You need to make your money work for you, especially in tech." Under her guidance, I began making strategic investments in emerging tech companies, including Dr. Sharma's new venture, which focused on sustainable AI solutions for smart cities. I started with small amounts, but as my business grew, so did my investment portfolio. The exhilaration of watching both my business and investments grow was intoxicating. For the first time since meeting Ethan, I felt truly alive, purposeful, and independent. I was building something valuable entirely on my own merits. Throughout this period, I maintained the appearance of being just Ethan's wife at social functions. I nodded politely when his colleagues' wives discussed their latest architectural awards or expensive European vacations. I attended his work dinners and played the supportive spouse role flawlessly, all while running a growing business from our home and making investment decisions that would alter the course of my life. My double life was exhausting but empowering. Each new client, each successful campaign, each investment return was a step toward the freedom I increasingly realized I needed from my controlling marriage. 5 years into our marriage, the facade began to crumble. It started with a text message that appeared on Ethan's phone while he was in the shower, a preview visible on his lock screen from someone named B that read, "Can't wait for our trip next month. Maui will be perfect." The message disappeared before I could read more, but it planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. Ethan had been more distant than usual, often coming home smelling of unfamiliar perfume that he claimed was from hugging emotional clients. Rather than confronting him immediately, I decided to investigate. I noted his patterns, the late Monday meetings that always ran until after 10 p.m., the industry conferences that never had websites I could find, the sudden increase in networking dinners at a specific upscale restaurant downtown. The following Monday, I told Ethan I was visiting my parents to help them set up a new smart home system. Instead, I parked my car near the restaurant he frequented and waited. At 8:45 p.m., his luxury sedan pulled into the parking lot. 15 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes arrived, and a woman with striking red hair stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized Brenda Chen, a former colleague of Ethan's whom he'd worked with on a controversial city development project. I watched them embrace in a way colleagues never would. Saw him kiss her deeply in the parking lot before they entered the restaurant together. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone, my stomach a hollow pit of betrayal and confirmation. I gave them 30 minutes before I walked into the restaurant. They were at a secluded corner booth, his hand on hers, leaning in intimately, whispering. I approached silently, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "This explains the late meetings," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Ethan jerked back, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and finally settling on annoyance at being caught. Brenda had the decency to look embarrassed, gathering her purse and mumbling something about using the restroom. "Aurora, this isn't what it looks like," Ethan began, using the same smooth tone he employed with difficult city planners. "Really?" I asked. "Because it looks like you're having a romantic dinner with your girlfriend while your wife thinks you're working." The conversation that followed was surreal. Ethan offered a half-hearted apology, claimed it was just physical, and had the audacity to blame me for his infidelity. "You've been so wrapped up in your little coding projects," he said, lowering his voice as neighboring diners began to notice our attention. "You've become disconnected, Aurora, unfocused on us. When was the last time you truly engaged in our marriage, beyond a screen?" I left the restaurant alone, driving aimlessly for hours before returning home. Ethan came back past midnight, offering promises to end the affair, suggesting couples counseling, even proposing a second honeymoon to reconnect. For reasons I didn't fully understand then, I pretended to consider reconciliation. "I need time," I told him, which wasn't a lie. I needed time, not to forgive him, but to plan my next steps. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception on both our parts. Ethan became temporarily attentive, bringing flowers, suggesting date nights, while I began consulting with divorce attorneys during my meetings with clients. David Miller, a formidable divorce attorney specializing in intellectual property and tech disputes, recommended by Dr. Sharma, laid out the reality of my situation. Washington is a community property state, he explained. Without a prenuptial agreement, the court will divide marital assets 50-50ths. However, intellectual property developed during marriage can be tricky. We need to establish that your work was truly independent. I learned about our financial entanglements, the complexity of divorcing someone with family money and significant architectural contracts, and the importance of documenting everything. David advised me to gather information about all our assets, accounts, and investments, especially any hidden ones Ethan might have, before making any moves. Knowledge is power, especially in divorce, he said. My cautious information gathering came to an abrupt halt when Ethan discovered my browser history on our shared home computer. I had forgotten to use private browse for one search. Intellectual property rights, divorce, Washington state. His rage was immediate and frightening. He cornered me in our kitchen, waving his phone with the screenshot he'd taken. Is this what you've been doing? Planning to divorce me and steal my ideas and my money? His face was red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. Let me make this clear, Aurora. You'll have nothing without me. Nothing. My family's lawyers will make sure of it. I remained calm, which only infuriated him more. I'm not planning anything, Ethan. I was just researching after what happened. Wouldn't you do the same? He seemed mollified by my explanation, but the threat lingered between us. That night, I moved all my important business documents and app code to secure cloud storage and began transferring digital records to encrypted drives I kept in a safety deposit box Ethan knew nothing about. The final discovery came 3 weeks later. While organizing our study, a task Ethan never participated in, I found a digital file hidden in a rarely used folder on his personal laptop. Inside was a scanned copy of a signed purchase agreement for a condo in downtown Seattle, dated to months prior, with Brenda Chen's name as buyer. I had never seen this document, even knowing about the affair. This tangible evidence of his investment in a future with another woman stung in a way I hadn't expected. The document showed he had put down nearly $100,000 as a deposit, money that was supposedly our money, on a property with Brenda. Before I could fully process this new betrayal, I heard the front door open. Voices. Ethan and a woman laughed in our entryway. I remained frozen in our study as they entered our living room, clearly not expecting me home in the middle of the day. I stepped out to find Ethan and Brenda embracing at the foot of our modern art sculpture, a piece we had chosen together. Aurora, Ethan exclaimed, not bothering to step away from Brenda. You're supposed to be at your parents'. I took a half day, I replied, surprised by my own composure. Clearly, I should have called first. What followed was not the emotional confrontation movies had prepared me for. Instead, Ethan became coldly pragmatic. Well, this saves me having to have a difficult conversation, he said, straightening his tie. I want a divorce, Aurora. Brenda and I are planning a future together. His confidence was absolute as he outlined his terms. He would generously allow me to keep my personal tech gadgets and a small settlement that would help me get back on my feet. The condo, our joint investments, even the shared modern art collection, would remain his. My lawyers will be in touch, he concluded, seemingly confused by my lack of hysteria or pleading. You should find somewhere else to stay, starting tonight. Actually, I said, as this is still legally my residence, too, I'll be staying. You and Brenda are welcome to find a hotel. His face darkened at my defiance, but Brenda tugged at his arm. Let's go, Ethan. We can deal with this later. As they left, Ethan turned back with one parting shot. You'll regret not taking my generous offer. By the time my lawyers are done, you'll be lucky to afford a shared co-working space in the worst part of town. I closed the door behind them, leaned against it, and for the first time since discovering his affair, I smiled. Ethan had no idea what was coming. Day after I caught Ethan and Brenda in our apartment. He moved most of his clothes and personal items out. I changed the digital locks that same afternoon, legally questionable, but it bought me time to properly document our belongings before he could remove anything valuable. Ethan's assumption about my financial naivety quickly became apparent in the initial settlement offer his lawyer sent over. A one-time payment of $100,000 and 6 months of living expenses. In exchange, I would make no claims on any of our other assets, including the condo I had helped design the interior of over 7 years. And, critically, any intellectual property I had developed during the marriage. He's testing the waters, David explained when I showed him the offer. He's assuming you don't know your rights or the true extent of your marital assets, especially the value of your tech creations. With David's guidance, I formally rejected the offer and began the process of financial discovery, a legal mechanism requiring both parties to disclose all assets and liabilities. Ethan's response was to have his lawyer delay and obfuscate at every turn. This is a standard tactic, David assured me. They're hoping to drain your resources and patience until you accept less than you deserve. What Ethan didn't realize was that I wasn't depending on his disclosures. I had been tracking our joint finances meticulously for years, including various investment accounts he thought I didn't know about. More importantly, I had my own growing resources that he knew nothing about. After careful consideration and consultation with David, we made a strategic decision. I would temporarily hide the true value of my business, Aurora Vance Innovations, and my investments during the initial phases of negotiation. Washington law generally considered businesses started during marriage to be community property, but David identified a potential exception based on the fact that Ethan had actively discouraged my business and provided no support, financial or otherwise, in its creation. We'll disclose everything at the right time, he assured me. But, for now, let's let him believe his own narrative about you being a struggling hobbyist. While the legal process inched forward, Ethan launched a social offensive. Mutual friends began avoiding my calls. Invitations to social events dried up. Even the concierge at our building, who had always been friendly, became coldly professional. I later learned that Ethan had been spreading a narrative that I had abandoned him emotionally, that I was obsessed with my screens, and that he was divorcing me despite his best efforts to save our marriage. In the circles where his family name carried weight, his version of events was accepted without question. The pain of the social exile was unexpectedly sharp. People I had broken bread with, celebrated holidays with, shared confidences with, all vanished from my life based on Ethan's lies. All except Marcus and Dr. Sharma, who never wavered in their support. People who believe gossip without hearing both sides aren't worth your energy. Aurora, Marcus told me over emergency burritos at his studio after a particularly difficult day. Focus on building your new life, not mourning the old one. Ethan's attempts to intimidate me escalated as he realized I wasn't going to quietly accept his terms. There were late-night phone calls, thinly veiled threats about making sure you never get another tech contract in this city again, and even a suggestion that he would report my business for intellectual property infringements. An empty threat, since my app designs and code were meticulously documented and legally sound. His family joined the pressure campaign. His Aunt Caroline called to reason with me. "We always knew you weren't quite right for Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But we accepted you because he chose you. Don't make this difficult, Aurora. Take what's being offered and move on with dignity." I maintained my composure through it all, a skill I had perfected during years of enduring subtle put-downs at Maxwell family gatherings. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Caroline. I'll be guided by my attorney's advice." Ethan's overconfidence began working against him. Believing I had no resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, he made several critical mistakes. He failed to disclose offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that I had documentation for. He underreported the value of his architectural contracts and potential future earnings. He claimed certain family heirlooms and art pieces were separate property when they had been clearly gifted to us as a couple. David documented each discrepancy meticulously, building a case that would eventually undermine his credibility with the court. Meanwhile, my company, Aurora Vance Innovations, experienced exponential growth during the separation period. A unique productivity app I designed for a remote workforce went viral, leading to features in prominent tech publications like TechCrunch and Wired. I had to decline interviews, citing personal reasons, but the professional recognition brought in a flood of new clients. The major breakthrough came when I secured a contract with a national healthcare provider to overhaul their patient communication app, a 7-figure deal that transformed my business from successful to exceptional. I hired 5 employees, rented a sleek office space in a prime downtown tech hub, and began turning down clients whose values didn't align with my company's mission. All of this happened as Ethan and his legal team continued to characterize me as a struggling freelancer dependent on his support. His perception of me as the naive small-town girl, dazzled by his wealth, had calcified to the point where he couldn't conceive of my success independent of him. The night before our final court date, I sat alone in the condo that had never truly felt like home, reflecting on my journey. 7 years earlier, I had been so eager to please Ethan that I had begun to lose myself. His betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to rediscover my strength, ambition, and worth. I packed a small, overnight bag, regardless of the judge's decision. I had decided I would not spend another night in the space where my marriage had unraveled. My new penthouse apartment was ready, purchased through an LLC Ethan knew nothing about, furnished with pieces I had chosen for their clean lines and intelligent design rather than their status value. As I zipped the bag closed, my phone chimed with a text from Dr. Sharma. Remember who you are tomorrow, Aurora. Not who he tried to make you be. Code your own destiny. With those words in my heart, I prepared to face the final act of my marriage. To Ethan Maxwell, the morning of our court date dawned clear and crisp. I dressed in a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, conservative but confident. With a single piece of jewelry, a small, elegant circuit board pendant, Marcus and Dr. Sharma had custom-made for me to mark my business's first major investment round. Your Independence Chip, Marcus had called it. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, as David had advised. Ethan was already there, looking impossibly expensive in a bespoke Italian suit. His attorney, Richard Vance, no relation. Beside him, Richard was a senior partner at one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms and had a reputation for aggressive divorce settlements that favored wealthy clients, especially when intellectual property was involved. Ethan smirked when he saw me, leaning over to whisper something to Richard that made both men chuckle. His confidence was palpable. He believed this was merely a formality before his inevitable victory. David arrived moments later, immaculate in a deep emerald suit that stood out against the courthouse's muted colors. Unlike Richard with his team of junior associates, David worked alone, but radiated a quiet competence that had reassured me from our first meeting. Ready? He asked, his expression giving nothing away to observing eyes. More than ready, I replied. Judge Evelyn Hayes' courtroom was intimidating in its austerity. The judge herself, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes, had a reputation for fairness but little patience for games or emotional displays. As proceedings began, Ethan put on a performance worthy of an Oscar. His testimony painted him as the devoted husband who had supported his wife's modest coding ambitions, only to be repaid with ingratitude and unreasonable demands in the divorce. I just want a fair resolution, Your Honor, he said, his voice modulated to convey reasonable disappointment. I've offered Mrs. Maxwell a generous settlement that would allow her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle while she pursues her little hobbies. Richard presented their case for the division of assets, highlighting Ethan's family wealth as separate property, minimizing my contributions to our marital assets, and suggesting that the condo, purchased primarily with his earnings and interior design, should remain his property. He even attempted to claim any intellectual property I developed during the marriage as community effort, citing my use of our home office. Throughout their presentation, I maintained my composure, neither reacting to Ethan's fabrications, nor revealing my emotions. Judge Hayes occasionally glanced my way, her expression unreadable. When it came time to sign the initial divorce decree, separating our marital status while financial matters were finalized, Ethan made a show of it. He signed with a flourish, a laugh escaping his lips as he capped his expensive Mont Blanc pen. As he returned to his seat, he passed close enough to whisper, "Enjoy going back to your parents' basement in rural Washington." David's presentation began methodically, his approach a stark contrast to Richard's theatrical arguments. He presented evidence of Ethan's financial deceptions during our marriage, the hidden offshore accounts, the lavish spending on Brenda, the pattern of financial control and obfuscation. "Your Honor," David said, "Mr. Maxwell has not been forthcoming about the full extent of marital assets as required by Washington law. He submitted documentation of accounts Ethan had failed to disclose, including dates, account numbers, and approximate balances." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat as David continued, his smug expression giving way to nervous glances at Richard. His attorney requested a brief recess, which Judge Hayes denied. I believe we should continue, Counselor. I'm particularly interested in hearing about these undisclosed assets. The atmosphere in the courtroom tensed as David methodically dismantled Ethan's financial deceptions. Judge Hayes' expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. Furthermore, Your Honor, David continued, we request that the court consider Mrs. Maxwell's separate property that was established during the marriage, but without any contribution or support from Mr. Maxwell, and in fact, against his active discouragement. This was the moment we had prepared for. Judge Hayes looked up from her notes. Please elaborate, Counselor. Mrs. Maxwell established a mobile application development business, Aurora Vance Innovations, during the marriage. Mr. Maxwell not only provided no support for this venture, but actively discouraged it and belittled her professional ambitions, as evidenced by these communications. David presented emails and text messages where Ethan had dismissed my business as a hobby and discouraged my entrepreneurial goals. Judge Hayes reviewed the documents carefully before addressing me directly for the first time. Mrs. Maxwell, the court requires full financial disclosure from both parties. Have you submitted complete information about this business venture? Not yet, Your Honor, I replied, as we had planned. My complete financial statement is ready for submission today. David handed the court clerk a sealed envelope containing my complete financial disclosure, the document we had strategically held back until this moment. I request that the court review Mrs. Maxwell's financial statement before making any determinations about asset division, David said. Judge Hayes nodded and opened the envelope. The courtroom fell silent as she read, her eyebrows rising slightly, the only indication of surprise from the otherwise composed judge. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Hayes looked up. For the record, I will read the summary of Mrs. Maxwell's assets. My heart pounded as she began to read. Aurora Vance Innovations, a mobile application development firm established 4 years ago. Current valuation based on revenue, contracts, and intellectual property assessments. $7,500,000. Ethan's head snapped up, his expression of disbelief almost comical. Investment portfolio including emerging tech stocks and venture capital. Investments, $2,100,000. Ethan gripped the table, his knuckles white. Real estate holdings. One property purchased 5 months ago. Valued at $1,200,000. By now, Ethan looked physically ill, his face drained of color, his body rigid with shock. Beside him, Richard was frantically whispering, but Ethan seemed unable to process what he was hearing. Total assets, $10,800,000. Judge Hayes concluded. The courtroom remained silent. Ethan stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound relief that the truth was finally on record. Judge Hayes broke the silence. Mr. Maxwell, do you wish to revise any of your previous statements regarding Mrs. Maxwell's financial dependence on you? Ethan seemed incapable of speech. Richard stood quickly. Your Honor, we were entirely unaware of these assets. We contend that, as they were acquired during the marriage, Mr. Maxwell is entitled to an equitable portion. David was prepared for this argument. Your Honor, we direct the court's attention to paragraph 17 of the Maxwell prenuptial agreement, which both parties signed prior to marriage. This was our ace. When reviewing our prenup years after signing, David had discovered a clause. Ethan's own lawyers had included any intellectual property or business created by either spouse during the marriage without capital investment from the other spouse would remain separate property in the event of divorce. The clause was likely included to protect Mr. Maxwell's potential architectural patents or ventures, David explained. However, the language applies equally to Mrs. Maxwell's business and intellectual property, which she built without any financial contribution from Mr. Maxwell, and indeed, with his active opposition. Judge Hayes reviewed the prenuptial agreement, nodding slowly. The language is indeed clear. Mr. Miller, please continue. David outlined how I had built my business from scratch, using my own savings and reinvesting profits, all while Ethan actively discouraged my efforts. He presented statements from clients and my mentor, Dr. Sharma, attesting to my independent work and business acumen. Throughout David's presentation, I watched Ethan, the man who had laughed while signing our divorce papers just an hour earlier, now sat frozen, his confident demeanor shattered. Brenda, who had been sitting in the gallery, slipped out of the courtroom, her expression unreadable. Judge Hayes took 45 minutes to review all documents before delivering her ruling. When she returned, her decision was clear. Based on the evidence presented and the terms of the prenuptial agreement, the court finds that Aurora Vance Innovations and the resulting investment portfolio, including all associated intellectual property, constitute separate property belonging solely to Mrs. Maxwell. Ethan made a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a protest. Furthermore, Judge Hayes continued, given Mr. Maxwell's failure to fully disclose marital assets as required by law, the court is inclined to view the division of remaining marital assets in a light more favorable to Mrs. Maxwell. The condo will be sold with proceeds divided according to the court's formula, with a greater percentage awarded to Mrs. Maxwell to compensate for Mr. Maxwell's deliberate concealment. The rest of her ruling was a blur of legal terms, but the outcome was clear. I would keep my business, my investments, and my new property. Additionally, I would receive a greater portion of our marital assets due to Ethan's deception. As we stood to leave, Ethan approached me, his lawyer trying unsuccessfully to hold him back. You planned this, he hissed, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. All these years, you were just waiting to take me down. I looked at the man I had once loved, now a stranger, consumed by his own narrative of victimhood. No, Ethan, I said, my voice calm and clear. I built something while you were busy destroying what we had. That's the difference between us. David gently guided me away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the emptying courtroom, the remnants of his superiority complex lying in shambles around him. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt less like a victory and more like liberation. The weight of deception, both Ethan's and my own necessary secrecy, lifted from my shoulders with each step down those marble stairs. Ethan attempted to intercept me outside, his earlier rage now replaced with an unsettling charm. Aurora, we should talk privately. I think I may have underestimated you. Perhaps we were hasty in ending things. All this business success you've had, we could combine forces. Think about the power couple we could be, building a tech and design empire. I almost laughed at the transparency of his sudden interest in reconciliation. Now that he knew my net worth, I was once again worthy of his attention. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. There's nothing to discuss, Ethan, I said. The court has made its decision. His smile faltered. You know I still care about you. We built a life together. David stepped between us. Mr. Maxwell, all communication should go through counsel from this point forward. That evening, I met Marcus, Dr. Sharma, and David for dinner at a sleek rooftop restaurant overlooking the Seattle skyline. We ordered champagne, not to celebrate the defeat of Ethan, but to toast new beginnings. To Aurora, Dr. Sharma raised her glass, who built an empire while a fool was looking the other way, literally. Within a week, I moved into my new penthouse, a space I had chosen for its panoramic views of the city and its open, modular floor plan, perfect for both living and occasionally brainstorming new app designs. Unlike the sterile luxury of the condo I had shared with Ethan, this space radiated warmth and purpose from the first day. It was truly mine, every piece of furniture, every carefully selected tech gadget reflecting my personality and values. With the divorce finalized, I could finally be public about my business. I expanded Aurora Vance Innovations from my small office to a full floor in a downtown tech tower, hiring a team of talented developers and designers who shared my vision for building user-centric, impactful applications. The company grew beyond my initial dreams. By the end of the first year post-divorce, we had clients across the country and were looking at international expansion, particularly in sustainable tech markets. I named Marcus our Chief Operating Officer. His organizational skills and keen understanding of the indie tech community complemented my creative and strategic focus. Dr. Sharma remained a key strategic advisor, helping us navigate complex tech landscapes. One of the most healing experiences was reconnecting with my family. Ethan had subtly isolated me from them, making visits home difficult, and often criticizing their simple lives afterward. For the first time in years, I spent holidays in rural Washington, laughing in my parents' cozy kitchen, walking through the quiet forests of my childhood, remembering the grounded values that had shaped me. We always knew you were extraordinary, Aurora, my mother said during one visit. We just worried you had forgotten how to bloom outside a hothouse. Hothouse. Despite the professional success, the emotional aftermath of the divorce wasn't always easy to navigate. There were nights I woke up angry at the years I'd spent diminishing myself to fit Ethan's expectations. There were moments I questioned my judgment, wondering how I had missed the red flags. Recognizing I needed help processing these feelings, I started working with a therapist specializing in recovery from manipulative relationships. Dr. Evelyn Park. Dr. Park helped me understand the gradual nature of emotional manipulation and how even strong, intelligent people can be vulnerable. Healing isn't linear, Aurora, she reminded me often. Some days you'll feel empowered by what you've overcome, other days you'll still feel the hurt. Both reactions are valid. 6 months after the divorce, I used a portion of my resources to establish the Innovation for All Foundation, a nonprofit focused on helping women and underrepresented groups achieve economic independence in the tech sector. We offered grants, mentorship, and practical education about coding, app development, and tech entrepreneurship, particularly for those coming out of controlling or abusive relationships. The foundation became a platform for speaking at women's tech conferences and university hackathons about equitable access to technology and the power of financial independence. Standing at podiums across the country, sharing my story and the lessons learned, I found purpose in transforming my painful experience into guidance for others. Tech independence isn't just about code, became my message. It's about having the freedom to build your own future, to innovate based on your values rather than necessity or fear. Almost exactly a year after our divorce was finalized, I encountered Ethan at a major tech gala I was attending with Dr. Sharma. He looked older, less polished than I remembered. He approached cautiously, his new date, clearly not Brenda, hovering uncertainly nearby. "You look well, Aurora," he said, his tone lacking the confidence that once defined him. "I hear your company is doing remarkable things. Your latest productivity app is quite ingenious." "It is," I replied simply. "I never really saw it." "Your potential," he admitted after an awkward pause. "I was so focused on molding you into what I thought a partner should be that I missed who you actually were, a true innovator." I studied the man I had once built my life around, feeling neither hate nor love, just a distant compassion for someone who measured worth in such limited, materialistic ways. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan," I said sincerely. Before rejoining Dr. Sharma and the others at our table, later that night, in the quiet of my new home, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. What had seemed like the ultimate rejection, Ethan's affair and cruel dismissal, had become the catalyst for my liberation. His attempt to discard me had forced me to rediscover my own value, not just as a developer, but as an independent woman, capable of building a thriving life on my own terms. I began dating again eventually, approaching relationships with healthier boundaries and a clearer sense of my non-negotiables. I no longer felt the need to contort myself to fit someone else's expectations. The right person would appreciate me for exactly who I was, accomplishments and flaws alike. My life now isn't perfect. No life ever is. But it's authentically mine. Every decision, from the clients I accept to the open source projects I support, reflects my values rather than someone else's expectations. The tech net worth that shocked Ethan in that courtroom continues to grow. But more importantly, so does my sense of purpose and peace. If you're watching this and facing your own crossroads of rejection or underestimation, remember that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their value isn't defined by anyone else's perception. Thank you for listening to my journey.